Throughout the long history of human civilization, certain machines stand as milestones of ingenuity, power, and cultural identity. Among them, the trireme of ancient Greece occupies a special place. More than just a ship, the trireme was the very embodiment of Greek sea power, sleek, fast, deadly, and symbolic of a new era of naval warfare. In its long, narrow hull and banks of oars worked by disciplined rowers, the trireme was at once elegant and terrifying. With a bronze-sheathed ram at its prow, it could slice into the side of an enemy ship and send it to the bottom within moments. For the sailors of Athens and the other city-states, the trireme was not merely a vessel of wood and bronze. It was a weapon of survival, a guardian of trade routes, and a force that would shape the destiny of the Mediterranean world. When we look back today, we see the trireme not only as a tool of war, but as a symbol of the age in which it flourished, the classical era of Greece, with its flowering of art, philosophy, and democracy, and its struggles for dominance across the Aegean. To tell the story of the Trireme is to tell the story of an entire civilization, its ambitions, and its battles upon the restless sea. Historical context. The rise of the Trireme cannot be understood without first considering the world of the Eastern Mediterranean in the first millennium before Christ. The Greeks were not alone upon these waters. To the east, the Phoenicians, renowned sailors and traders, had long dominated maritime commerce, their ships ranging from the Levant to Spain. To the south, the Egyptians maintained a tradition of riverine and coastal vessels. To the west, the emerging powers of Carthage and later Rome would one day contest the seas. In this crowded arena, control of the sea lanes meant survival. For the city-states of Greece, hemmed in by mountains and dependent upon trade for grain and goods, naval strength became not a luxury but a necessity. By the 7th century BCE, Greek shipwrights were building long, narrow warships propelled by oarsmen arranged in two banks, so-called Triremes. These ships were faster and more agile than the older single-level galleys. Yet even these proved inadequate in the face of growing naval arms races. Somewhere around the late 7th or early 6th century BCE, innovation gave birth to a new type of vessel, the trireme, or three-oared ship. The origins of the trireme are still debated. Some scholars point to Phoenician influence, others to Greek shipwrights experimenting with improved designs. But by the time of the Persian Wars in the early 5th century BCE, the trireme had become the standard warship of the Greek world. It was in the battles of this period, Artemisium, Salamis, and beyond, that the trireme would prove itself as the decisive weapon of naval warfare. For Athens in particular, the trireme became inseparable from its rise to power. With fleets numbering hundreds of these ships, the city-state was able to project its influence across the Aegean, defend against Persian invasion, and later maintain its dominance during the age of the Delian League. The trireme was thus not merely a tool of war, but the foundation upon which Athenian democracy and empire were built. The trireme was a marvel of ancient engineering, the result of centuries of experimentation with speed, maneuverability, and striking power. Its name, Triremes in Greek, literally means three-oared, referring to the arrangement of oars in three vertical tiers along each side of the hull. This was not simply an incremental improvement over earlier galleys. It was a revolutionary leap that allowed greater speed and more efficient use of manpower, making the trireme the most advanced warship of its time. Materials and shipyards. Building a trireme required not only skilled craftsmanship, but also vast natural resources. The hulls were primarily constructed of softwoods, such as pine and fir, which provided buoyancy and flexibility, while stronger timbers like oak were used for the keel and other structural components demanding durability. Cedar, highly prized for its resistance to rot, was also employed where available. Shipyards along the coasts of Athens, Corinth, and other maritime centers bustled with activity. The Athenian naval docks at the Piraeus became legendary, capable of housing and maintaining hundreds of ships. Building a trireme was a communal and state-driven effort. Shipwrights, carpenters, metalworkers, and rope makers all contributed their expertise. Bronze was essential for the ram, the trireme's deadliest weapon, and vast amounts of hemp were required for ropes, rigging, and sails. Construction techniques. The hull of the trireme was long and narrow, often exceeding 35 meters, about 115 feet, in length, but only about 5 meters, 16 feet, in width. This slender design minimized resistance through the water, allowing the vessel to move with speed and grace. Unlike merchant ships built for cargo capacity, the trireme sacrificed storage and comfort for agility. The secret of the trireme lay in its oar arrangement. 3 staggered tiers of rowers sat along each side, each man with his own oar. Careful spacing allowed their strokes to synchronize without interference. The lowest row, known as the Salamis, worked close to the waterline. The middle row, the Zygii, sat above them, and the top row, the Trireme, occupied the upper benches. Each oarsman had to be highly trained, for the efficiency of the ship depended on perfect rhythm. Above the oar banks, a narrow deck provided space for sailors, marines, and officers. A single mast with a square sail could be raised for long voyages, but in battle, the mast was usually removed to reduce weight and improve maneuverability. The prow carried the bronze ram, the embolon, forged to a deadly point. This weapon was designed to puncture enemy hulls below the waterline, a tactic far more devastating than any exchange of arrows or javelins. Innovations and challenges. The trireme's design represented a delicate balance. To achieve speed, the ship had to remain light. Yet it also had to withstand the stresses of ramming, which placed enormous strain on the hull. Shipwrights responded with clever reinforcements, using a strong keel and carefully joined planks held together by mortise and tenon joints. Because of their light construction, triremes were not built for long-term endurance at sea. They required frequent maintenance, hauling out of the water to dry and repair the hulls. Their crews, numbering around 200, needed regular supplies of food and fresh water. As a result, fleets operated close to shorelines, making use of beachheads and harbors. For Athens, maintaining a fleet of triremes was not just a matter of construction, but of constant upkeep. The city invested enormous resources in its naval infrastructure, arsenals, dockyards, and supply systems to ensure its ships remained seaworthy and ready for battle at a moment's notice. The human element. Perhaps the greatest challenge of the trireme was not its construction, but its crew. Each vessel required around 170 rowers, plus sailors, marines, and officers. Training these men to row in perfect unison was as vital as the ship's design itself. A trireme that rowed out of rhythm could lose speed, stagger in formation, or even snap oars in the water. The coordination of so many men demanded discipline and practice. In Athens, the rowers were often citizens, poor but free men who found service in the fleet, both a livelihood and a duty. Their skill gave the city not only naval supremacy, but also a deeper sense of democratic participation. For in the rhythm of the oars they found both labor and belonging. The trireme was not merely a vessel of wood and bronze. It was a carefully calculated machine of war, designed for speed, agility, and sudden violence upon the sea. Every plank, every oar, every ounce of bronze was chosen to serve one purpose: to dominate the waters of the Mediterranean. Size and structure. The trireme was relatively small by later standards, yet its design was revolutionary for its age. Most triremes measured around 35 to 40 meters in length, 115 to 130 feet, with a beam of only 5 to 6 meters, 16 to 20 feet. This long, narrow hull created a sleek silhouette that could slice through the waves with remarkable efficiency. The shallow draft allowed the vessel to maneuver close to shorelines and even to be hauled up onto beaches when necessary. The keel formed the ship's backbone, crafted from sturdy oak to bear the stresses of battle. Planking was secured by mortise and tenon joints, ensuring both strength and flexibility. Lightness was essential. A trireme had to be swift, and excessive weight would doom its agility. Unlike cargo ships, which were rounded and heavy, the trireme was lean and fragile, a thoroughbred designed not for endurance but for speed and sudden strikes. The ram, embolon. The deadliest feature of the trireme was its bronze-sheathed ram. Projecting from the prow like the beak of a predatory bird, the ram was forged to pierce enemy hulls below the waterline. Once embedded, it tore open planks and joints, flooding compartments and crippling opponents within minutes. Ramming was not a random act. It was a tactical science. Commanders maneuvered their ships to strike at angles, maximizing damage while minimizing the risk of the ram becoming stuck. To achieve this, the trireme needed not only speed but precision handling, qualities that made it the supreme naval weapon of its age. Oars and propulsion. The true genius of the trireme lay in its oars. Arranged in 3 vertical tiers, they allowed for an unprecedented concentration of manpower within a compact hull. Threnites, upper row. These rowers sat high above the water, their long oars providing leverage for powerful strokes. Zygians, middle row. Positioned at the mid-level, they balanced the rhythm of the upper and lower rows. Thalamites, lower row. Closest to the waterline, these men endured spray and damp, pulling shorter oars with equal discipline. Altogether, around 170 rowers propelled the ship. When perfectly synchronized, the vessel could reach bursts of up to 7 or 8 knots. Astonishing speed for the time. The thunder of so many oars striking the sea in unison was said to be both awe-inspiring and terrifying, echoing across the water like a drumbeat of war. Sails and rigging. For long voyages, the trireme carried a single mast with a square sail of linen. This allowed crews to rest while winds bore the ship across open waters. In battle, however, the mast and sail were usually taken down to reduce weight and prevent entanglement. Victory in combat depended not on the wind, but on the strength and coordination of the rowers. Crew and complement A, fully manned trireme, carried about 200 men. Of these, 170 were rowers, the heart of the vessel. The remainder included Marines, hoplites, around 10 to 20 heavily armed soldiers who could fight during boarding actions or defend the ship with spears and shields. Archers or slingers, lightly armed troops who rained missiles upon enemy decks. Sailors, responsible for rigging, navigation, and basic seamanship. Officers, led by the trierarch, often a wealthy citizen who financed and commanded the ship. He was supported by a helmsman, a bow officer, and a boatswain who kept order among the rowers. Life on board. Life aboard a trireme was harsh and unforgiving. Rowers sat shoulder to shoulder in cramped, humid conditions, often exposed to the elements. Food was basic. Bread, dried fish, olives, and water was carried in skins and jars. On long campaigns, the ship would beach frequently so that men could cook meals, repair equipment, and rest. Despite the hardships, service on a trireme held honor. For Athenians in particular, it was seen as a form of citizenship in action. Poor men who could not afford armor or weapons found in the oar their contribution to the defense and glory of the polis. In this way, the trireme was not only a warship, but also a vessel of democracy, powered by the hands of free citizens. Innovations. The trireme's innovations extended beyond its oar system. Its light construction, reinforced ram, and ability to execute complex maneuvers, such as the diekplos, breaking through enemy lines, or the periplus, outflanking the enemy, made it tactically versatile. It could strike quickly, disengage, and strike again, outmatching heavier, less agile ships. In short, the Trireme combined speed, power, and human coordination in a way no vessel had before. It was as much an expression of Greek society, disciplined, communal, innovative, as it was a tool of war. The dawn of the 5th century BCE brought with it one of the greatest existential threats Greece would ever face, the Persian Empire. With its vast armies and immense resources, Persia sought to subjugate the fractious Greek city-states. The battles that followed would cement the Trireme's reputation as the decisive weapon of its age. When Xerxes launched his invasion in 480 BCE, he brought not only an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, but also a fleet of over 1,000 ships drawn from across his empire. Against this, the Greeks, led by Athens and supported by allies like Corinth and Aegina, could muster only a few hundred vessels, nearly all of them triremes. At Artemisium, the triremes proved their worth. In swirling, confused engagements, they darted in and out of enemy formations, ramming Persian ships and then retreating before they could be overwhelmed. Though indecisive, these clashes showed that the Trireme could stand against superior numbers when handled with skill. But it was at the Battle of Salamis later that year that the Trireme secured its immortality. Themistocles, the brilliant Athenian commander, lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits near Salamis. There, the Persians' numerical advantage was neutralized. Greek triremes surged forward in disciplined formations, their oars cutting the water in perfect rhythm. Rams struck home again and again, splintering hulls, overturning ships, and sowing chaos among the enemy. By day's end, the Persian fleet was shattered and Greece was saved. Salamis became a turning point in the Persian Wars, and the Trireme was hailed as the savior of Greek freedom. The rise of Athenian naval power. In the decades that followed, Athens transformed the Trireme from a weapon of survival into the cornerstone of empire. With funds from the Delian League, originally an alliance against Persia, Athens built and maintained a fleet of hundreds of triremes. The shipyards of Piraeus thrummed with activity, as wood, bronze, and manpower flowed into the construction of vessels that would project Athenian influence across the Aegean. These triremes were not confined to defensive duties. They escorted merchant convoys, enforced tribute from subject states, and patrolled the seas to suppress piracy. Wherever Athenian triremes appeared, they carried both the promise of protection and the threat of overwhelming force. For ordinary Athenians, service aboard these ships became a defining feature of citizenship. Unlike the hoplite phalanx, which favored the wealthy who could afford armor and weapons, the fleet was powered by the labor of the poor. In the steady beat of the oars, men of humble birth found their role in defending democracy and expanding Athenian power. The Peloponnesian War, Trireme against Trireme. The true test of the Trireme's dominance came not against foreign empires, but against fellow Greeks. In 431 BCE, Athens and Sparta plunged into the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict that lasted nearly 3 decades. For Athens, naval supremacy was both shield and sword, allowing the city to resist Spartan invasions and strike deep into enemy territory. Triremes became the instruments of strategy, raiding coastlines, blockading harbors, and ferrying troops. Naval battles were fought at Naupactus, at Sybota, at the Hellespont, and in countless other waters. Now, instead of facing lumbering Persian ships, the triremes of Athens confronted those of Corinth, Syracuse, and other Greek rivals, equally swift, equally deadly. The war reached a tragic climax for Athens in the Sicilian expedition of 415 to 413 BCE. A massive Athenian fleet of triremes sailed to attack Syracuse, seeking to extend Athenian influence into Sicily. At first confident, the Athenians soon found themselves trapped. In the confined harbor of Syracuse, their triremes lost the advantage of maneuver. Enemy ships blocked their path, and fierce fighting erupted at close quarters. Rams splintered, oars snapped, men fought hand-to-hand across decks. By the end, the Athenian fleet was annihilated, and with it, much of Athens's naval power. The Peloponnesian War revealed both the brilliance and the fragility of the Trireme. In open waters, maneuver and discipline could bring victory. In confined spaces, or against equally skilled opponents, disaster could strike just as swiftly. Beyond Athens, other powers at sea. Though Athens is most closely associated with the Trireme, other Greek city-states and Mediterranean powers also embraced this formidable vessel. Corinth, with its long naval tradition, fielded fleets of triremes that challenged Athenian supremacy. Aegina, once a maritime rival of Athens, had earlier deployed triremes in its own struggles for dominance. Outside Greece, the Phoenicians continued to build triremes for their own purposes, blending their seafaring heritage with the demands of warfare. Carthage, heir to Phoenician traditions, would later employ similar ships in its struggles against Greek colonies in Sicily and eventually against Rome. Thus the trireme was not just a Greek innovation, but a Mediterranean phenomenon, shaping the balance of power from the Aegean to the western seas. The Battle of Salamis, 480 BCE. Few naval battles in history have been as decisive or as celebrated as the Battle of Salamis. Here the trireme proved itself not just a tool of war, but a vessel of destiny. After the burning of Athens by Xerxes' army, the Greek fleet gathered in the narrow straits near the island of Salamis. Outnumbered nearly 3-1, the Greek commanders faced a seemingly impossible task. Yet Themistocles, the Athenian strategist, saw opportunity where others saw despair. By fighting in narrow waters, he reasoned, the massive Persian fleet would lose its maneuverability and the discipline of Greek triremes would carry the day. As dawn broke, the Greek fleet surged forward. Their prows, tipped with bronze rams gleaming in the sun, cut through the waves with terrifying purpose. The oars struck the water in unison, the rhythm kept by the voice of the boatswain. Persian ships, crowded together, became tangled and confused. One after another, Greek triremes drove their rams into enemy hulls, splintering planks, capsizing vessels, and sending warriors into the sea. By day's end, the Persian fleet lay in ruins. The victory at Salamis changed the course of history. It preserved the independence of the Greek city-states, ensured the survival of Athenian democracy, and marked the trireme as the most formidable naval weapon of its age. The Battle of Arginusae, 406 BCE. Later, during the long and bitter Peloponnesian War, Triremes again took center stage at the Battle of Arginusae. The Athenians, facing a Spartan fleet, assembled a massive armada of over 150 ships. Many of the crews were hastily trained, yet under disciplined command, they managed to turn the tide. Using clever tactics, the Athenians encircled and destroyed a significant portion of the Spartan fleet. Victory was theirs, but it came at a cost. A storm prevented the rescue of many drowning sailors, and in the aftermath, Athenian commanders were put on trial for negligence. Thus, even in triumph, the trireme revealed the heavy human toll of naval warfare. The Battle of Aegospotami, 405 BCE. The following year, Athens' fortunes collapsed at Aegospotami. Here, Spartan commander Lysander caught the Athenian fleet off guard. Beached along the shores of the Hellespont, the Athenians were surprised by a sudden Spartan attack. Triremes were destroyed or captured where they lay. Crews scattered and overwhelmed. The defeat was catastrophic. Without its fleet of triremes, Athens was cut off from vital grain supplies and soon forced to surrender. Thus, the very ships that had once carried Athens to empire became the instruments of its downfall. The trireme in legend and memory. Beyond historical battles, the triremes sailed into legend. Greek poets and historians described them as swift as arrows, as relentless as storms. Heroes of the oar and the ram entered the lore of the city-states, their deeds celebrated in verse and remembered in festival. Some tales spoke of triremes racing the winds, arriving in distant harbors as if borne by gods. Others told of ships lost in sudden squalls, their crews swallowed by Poseidon's wrath. Over time, the trireme became more than wood and bronze. It became a symbol of Greek ingenuity, courage, and the ever-present peril of the sea. Symbol of Athenian democracy. The trireme was more than a naval weapon. It was the lifeblood of Athenian power and a reflection of the city's social order. Unlike the hoplite phalanx, where only wealthy citizens could afford armor and shields, the trireme relied on the labor of thousands of ordinary men. These citizens, often poor, rowed side by side, their strength and rhythm carrying the ship across the sea. In this way, the trireme became a vessel of democracy itself. Athens could project its influence abroad because its citizens worked in unison at the oars. Naval service gave even the poorest Athenians a direct stake in the survival of their city and the expansion of its empire. The hum of synchronized oars was, in a sense, the heartbeat of Athenian democracy. Influence on art and literature. The trireme also sailed into Greek imagination. Vase paintings, carvings, and murals depicted long, sleek hulls with rows of oars, prows tipped with menacing bronze rams. Playwrights and poets used the trireme as a metaphor for strength, unity, and peril. In tragedies, the sea voyage became a symbol of human struggle against fate. In epics, the warship represented the reach of human ambition. Herodotus, Thucydides, and Xenophon all recorded the exploits of triremes, weaving them into the grand tapestry of Greek history. These accounts elevated the ships from mere military instruments into enduring symbols of Greek identity. The decline of the trireme. By the 4th century BCE, the dominance of the trireme began to wane. New designs, such as the quadrireme and quinquereme, introduced larger ships with more oarsmen and greater carrying capacity. These heavier vessels could carry more marines and withstand more punishment, shifting the focus of naval combat from speed and maneuver to brute strength and boarding actions. Yet, even as new warships replaced them, the trireme remained iconic. Later generations still looked back at Salamis as the height of Greek naval glory, a triumph made possible by the sleek, swift triremes of Athens. Rediscovery and reconstruction. For centuries after antiquity, the exact design of the trireme was a matter of speculation. Ancient descriptions survived, but no complete trireme remained. Only fragments, carvings, literary accounts, and scattered remains hinted at their form. In the 20th century, scholars and shipwrights sought to bring the trireme back to life. In the 1980s, a full-scale reconstruction named Olympias was launched in Greece. Built according to ancient principles, Olympias demonstrated that the old descriptions were accurate. With a trained crew, she achieved remarkable speeds, proving the ingenuity of Greek naval engineering. Today, Olympias rests as a museum ship, a living connection to the ancient world. Her presence allows modern visitors to imagine the sound of hundreds of oars striking the water in perfect unison, the prow surging forward, and the ghost of ancient battles echoing across the waves. Legacy across time. The trireme's legacy endures not only in history, but in language. Even now, the image of rowing together serves as a metaphor for unity and shared purpose. In maritime history, the trireme remains a benchmark, a vessel that combined human labor, design genius, and military necessity in perfect harmony. To the Greeks, the trireme was the guardian of their freedom, the spearhead of their empire, and the stage on which their destiny was fought. To us, it is a reminder of how technology, society, and human will can merge into creations that change the course of history. The trireme was never just a ship. It was the product of human ambition, of a society that looked to the sea not only as a frontier of trade and travel, but as a battlefield on which the fate of nations could be decided. In its sleek lines and its rhythmic oars, we see the ingenuity of the ancient Greeks who crafted a vessel perfectly suited to their world, swift, agile, and devastating in combat. It carried Athens to the heights of power, defended Greece at Salamis, and shaped the course of wars that determined the balance of the ancient Mediterranean. It was both a tool of empire and a reflection of the society that built it, democratic in spirit, demanding the labor of all, and rewarding the unity of many hands working together. Though the Trireme eventually gave way to larger, more heavily armed ships, its legend never faded. The echoes of its victories resounded in Greek memory, celebrated in art, literature, and history. Even centuries later, the very idea of hundreds of rowers striking the sea in unison remained a symbol of strength and unity. Today, the Trireme stands as one of the most iconic warships of antiquity. Its story reminds us that technology, when paired with discipline and vision, can alter the destiny of nations. It also teaches us that every vessel, no matter how mighty, is ultimately bound by the courage and endurance of the people who crew it. In the quiet rhythm of its oars, we hear not only the pulse of war, but the heartbeat of a civilization. And as we remember the Trireme, we remember that history itself is carried forward not by machines alone, but by the human spirit that guides them across the uncertain seas of time.